Welcome, everyone, to America's Civic Stage, a vision to celebrate Pennsylvania Avenue. I'm Beth White, Vice Chair of the National Capital Planning Commission. Pennsylvania Avenue, between the White House and the U.S. Capitol, is one of the most important public spaces in our nation, and it has served as a witness to so many events that shape the collective identity of our capital city and our country. This is a place that belongs to all Washingtonians and all Americans. At a time when it feels increasingly difficult to find things that bring us together as a nation, this place unifies and heals regardless of our backgrounds. But the Avenue is facing a number of challenges and needs a new vision to ensure it remains an impactful place. COVID and the city's commercial real estate development and other neighborhoods has impacted the Avenue's economic vitality and daily activity. The streetscape is showing a lot of wear and tear, and special events can be challenging and expensive to plan and carry out here. Pennsylvania Avenue deserves better, and I want to thank all of our federal and local partners for their leadership on the Pennsylvania Avenue initiative. This is an effort to make physical and programming improvements to the Avenue. So this group reached out to 6 very inspiring experts for even more inspiration on a new Avenue vision, and I'm certain their discussion today will inspire you too. The pandemic has isolated us from each other today, and we would like to challenge everyone to think big and imagine how we can come together to celebrate the Avenue and everything it stands for and represents to each of us. And I hope that soon we can all be there in person enjoying this important destination. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Kathleen Mcguigan is the editor-in-chief at Architectural Record and has over 3 decades of cultural journalism experience in architecture and the arts. A Harvard Graduate School of Design Loeb Fellow, she leads an award-winning team at the Record covering innovative architecture and urban design projects. Welcome, Kathleen. We look forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm very happy to be here today. Today, you're going to hear in this forum some of the big ideas that could transform Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the U.S. Capitol, an incredibly important 1 mile and a little bit longer stretch that is so rich with symbolism and history in our democracy. It's been the site, as we've said, as Beth said, of celebrations such as inaugural parades. It's been the site of mourning. I can remember being a child and watching President Kennedy's casket borne from the White House to the Capitol to lie in state. And it's often been the site of protests. Most recently last summer, that included demonstrations for Black Lives Matter. And on January 6th, it was a route taken by supporters of former President Trump from his rally outside the White House to the Capitol, which hundreds of those supporters then stormed. Pennsylvania Avenue also holds a unique position in the layout of Washington because it is a bridge between the Federal Triangle and the downtown have. And it is a street with many constituents, as Beth said. It's government employees, it's other office workers, it's many tourists who will certainly have been returning and will return to the Capitol, and as well as a street for Washington citizens. Washington is one of the most diverse cities in America, and it is a kind of grand main street that must be welcoming to all of people. And in addition, like many great urban boulevards that were planned in a long ago era, it is now filled with vehicular traffic. It is too wide for pedestrians. It has been drained of vibrant life along much of its course at street level. And as Beth said, it's in need of repair, replanting, and re-envisioning. And so today, again, as she said, we'll hear from 6 experts who participated in Ideas Charrette at the end of 2018 and who came up with many ways to transform the Avenue. The panelists represent a range of professions, including architecture, landscape architecture, special events, economic development, operations, and transportation. After their presentations, I'll follow up with a discussion and we'll wrap up with questions from you in the audience. So please submit your questions with the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that will be activated shortly. And you may submit your questions at any time during the presentation today, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. In addition to answering your questions, we will post 2 polls at various points throughout, and participating is very easy. Just select an option when the poll window pops up and click the blue submit button at the bottom of your screen. Now, before we get to the panelists, I want to introduce Sarah Ridgeley, a senior urban planner with the National Capital Planning Commission, who is here to give us background on the Pennsylvania Avenue Initiative. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you all for joining us today. After a year of upheaval and uncertainty, now is an ideal time to discuss the Avenue's future. It's increasingly clear that we aren't returning to the pre-pandemic ways of the world. Now, as many have mentioned, Pennsylvania Avenue has been the symbolic heart of our nation for generations. Always reinventing itself, it stood as a witness to and a testament of our nation's commitment to democracy. It's been messy, and there have been failures and successes here. Laid out in the L'Enfant plan to serve as the People's Promenade, this cohesive historic streetscape directly links the White House and U.S. Capitol, and it belongs to all Americans. This really is the place for people to have their voices heard in the capital city. Now, it also has a lot of physical and operational challenges. There was once a Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation, but it was dissolved in 1996. And since then, there really hasn't been one steward in charge of the Avenue's upkeep and programming. And of course, the responsible agencies here do what they can to keep the street in good repair, but this place competes for resources with many other important places in Washington's monumental core. And as such, the images you can see here on the screen have become commonplace, and the street's lost a lot of its luster. The federal and local agencies with Avenue responsibilities recognize that this place and everyone that visits it deserve better. In 2018, initiative partners invited the panelists that you'll hear from today to brainstorm early ideas on the Avenue's future role and character in the capital city. That conversation provided a spark of interest, and it built the multi-agency support needed to embark on envisioning the Avenue's future. Now, this isn't the only part of Pennsylvania Avenue gaining attention. This initiative's work is at the heart of the avenue between the White House and Capitol, but it's part of a larger effort, including improvements at the west end from the White House to Washington Circle, and then on the east end from the Sousa Bridge to Southern Avenue. As much as this is a national street, it also belongs to all Washingtonians and has strong connections to the city's 8 wards. As we reflect on the tumultuous past year, today's panel will discuss how one of the most symbolic public spaces in the country could transform into an inclusive and equitable civic stage for the city and nation. This is where everyone can gather, celebrate, and reconnect in a way only experienced in the nation's capital. Like their conversation with the initiative agencies, today's goal is to get the panel to spark your interest and inspire you to participate in transforming the Avenue. Many people listening today are from Washington and have strong memories of this special place, and others have never been here in person, but they feel the symbolic strength of the Avenue. The street belongs to everyone, and the initiative partners want as many voices and perspectives as possible to begin engaging in the discussion to help shape the Avenue experience. So this is just the beginning. Later this year and into 2022, NCPC will begin public outreach to envision the Avenue's future. On behalf of the initiative partners, including NCPC, the National Park Service, the General Services Administration, and the government of the District of Columbia, we hope you will join us for this very important conversation. So please help us spread the word by sharing a link to today's event with your families, friends, and colleagues. We'll go ahead and post today's discussion to the NCPC website in the coming week. And we also have more information on the initiative posted online, and you can send us a question or comment there too. I'd like to again thank the audience for joining us today, the panelists for their time and inspiration, and thank you, Kathleen, for moderating today's discussion. Back to you.
Thank you, Sarah. As we get started with the panelists' presentations, remember to submit your questions with the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which is now activated. First, it is my pleasure to introduce Jeffrey Tumlin, who is Director of Transportation at the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. He oversees the transit system, the parking, traffic engineering, bicycle and pedestrian safety, transportation accessibility, and taxi regulation for the city and county of San Francisco. For more than 20 years, he has led planning in station areas and in the downtown. He's done campus plans and worked citywide. And he has also lectured widely and given classes nationally and internationally. So please join me in welcoming Jeffrey Tumlin.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next slide, please. Streets change over time, reflecting our changing values, technologies, and economies. Today, we are all called upon to renew our democracy, expanding its grace to cover all Americans. So in our thinking about Pennsylvania Avenue, can we start with democracy and equity? Can we use design to advance justice and expand inclusion for all? Can the street itself foster a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential? Can we unlock the promise of the nation by unleashing the promise in us all? Next slide. So what we're wondering is, can Pennsylvania Avenue itself symbolize the promise of our democracy? The idea that all of us are created equal, that justice for all is embedded in our Constitution, that our democracy requires that all of us be welcome to participate, and that democracy comes with specific rights and obligations. Can the street itself symbolize a transparent and accessible government worthy of our trust and investment? And moreover, can the street itself symbolize the progress of our great work in creating an inclusive democracy, from the Declaration of Independence to the Civil Rights Act and beyond? Next slide. So we know that Pennsylvania Avenue isn't just an artery, it's an idea. And it's been called America's Main Street, but as Heather Arnold will describe in the next presentation, that's not quite right. We think that Pennsylvania Avenue is America itself as a main street, that it actually makes manifest the components of our Constitution that describe the balance of power, that describe our federalism and its relationship to local government. It's also obviously a place of national myth-making and memory, as well as celebration, mourning, and rage. Next slide. Unfortunately, in its current form, Pennsylvania Avenue also symbolizes our republic's failures. The federal buildings along the avenue offer monumentality, but not inclusion. They say that government is above the people, not of the people. In the street itself, the movement of the privileged is prioritized. Indeed, the convenience of the privileged on the street is more important than the safety of the underprivileged. And the needs of the governed are less important than the wants of the governors. Next slide. We can correct this, but correcting Pennsylvania Avenue requires complex thinking about what it is, as well as how to manage the space. Pennsylvania Avenue needs to be adaptable, both to the immediate needs and people of our society, but also to future needs. We need to manage its vast scale and make it both monumental as well as intimate. We need to adapt to new technology and to factors like climate change. We need to adapt to changes in transportation innovation. And so we wonder, how could we design the street to represent our republic and symbolize the best aspirations of our democracy? Next slide. So at a practical scale, what if we reprioritize the mobility modes in order to put people in the most efficient modes of transportation first? Next slide. On a practical scale, what if we looked at the entirety of Pennsylvania Avenue to connect all modes of transportation across all 8 wards? Next slide. On a practical scale, what if we remembered that the 30 series bus lines that WMATA runs currently connect from one side of the district to the other across the most unlikely series of neighborhoods that represent almost the full diversity of America itself? And what if we prioritized those buses over other modes of transportation so that they weren't stuck in congestion? Next slide. And moreover, what if we took the nascent investments in the bikeway on Pennsylvania Avenue and actually connected it to other bikeway facilities across the district so that It was not only possible and safe, but utterly delightful to bike from one end of the district to the other via Pennsylvania Avenue. Next slide, please. And back to Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for a really provocative opener, so rich with a whole groundwork of potential for Pennsylvania Avenue. And now I'm delighted to introduce Heather Arnold, who is the CEO and founder of VIA Metrics, LLC, a firm providing data-driven projections and solutions for affordable housing and mixed-use retail. She has guided transformational commercial initiatives at the site, city, and county levels for over 20 years, including development of the DC Office of Planning's Vibrant Streets Toolkit. Please welcome Heather Arnold.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to present with all of these people who I've gotten to know so well as professionals and friends, and just really remarkable people. Pennsylvania has always been a bit of an urban enigma, if you will. And if we can flip to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what Jeffrey had mentioned, which was this idea of Pennsylvania Avenue as America's Main Street, which is how people used to refer to it. It created a situation where everyone wanted to line it with exciting, vibrant retail uses, and then felt a sense of defeat when the stores and restaurants there inevitably failed. Although my perspective on this probably seems a bit un-American, I have been reassured that dissent is the ultimate expression of democracy, so I entrust you with these thoughts. Pennsylvania Avenue is not a retail street. There are physical urban typology reasons for this. But the bigger cause is the fluctuations that occur in its customer base on a monthly, seasonal, even daily basis. There are few residents in the area, lots of employees under good conditions. The visitor population swings dramatically. Let's add on top of this that every time the street hosts a festival, a protest, a celebration, the people who are operating businesses find it almost impossible to operate. Staffing scheduling becomes a total mystery. It disrupts loading and deliveries. It overwhelms trash and disposal. And the locals, who are typically a retailer's bread and butter customer, can't or don't want to go there. If you could advance to the next slide, please. On the previous slide, you may have read the observation about how Pennsylvania Avenue essentially dead ends into the White House and Capitol. From a design perspective, this might be the most important and beautiful part of the avenue itself. But from a functional perspective, it makes retail very difficult to support. The best retail spaces are along some place that is a pass-through, a street that you traverse and barely notice the retail until the day that you need a caffeine fix or decide to shop for an engagement ring. As a result, some of the best retail locations on the avenue are at the corners of the north-south cross streets, as most of them allow for that casual interaction with the space itself on a more frequent basis. You'll also notice that most of the retail space, like most of the activity on the street, occurs on the north side for several reasons. First of all, that's the sidewalk that gets the sun, and also because of the monumentality that Jeffrey and others will refer to on the south side that was never built to support retail uses in the first place. Next slide, please. Therefore, from a true economist's perspective, we are constantly searching for that equilibrium between supply and demand. However, as we have already discussed, our demand on the street is ridiculously inconstant. And for that reason, we need to regard this street as an area where flexible retail demand needs to be met with a flexible retail supply. That doesn't require a business person to support and pay for a bricks and mortar location and the daily expenses associated with it 365 days a year. Food trucks, permanent kiosks, they all serve the function of temporary retail supply. Can you imagine how cool Pennsylvania Avenue would look with a tiny fleet of mini Airstreams filled with food and even some services during times of high use? How American is that? Next slide, please. This inevitably begs the question, If the ground level of these buildings are not filled with stores and restaurants, what goes there? That is one of the questions yet to be answered, and one that I'm excited to contribute to as this process moves forward. Every city in the country, even in the world, is dealing with this exact issue. And it might be one of the areas where the highest level of creativity will come out of the next generation of urban planning. Expanding public spaces to the inside, creating classrooms on the ground floor, embracing visually interesting professional offices are all possible options. Next slide, please. But more importantly than what happens in the first floor of the buildings is what happens in between them on Pennsylvania Avenue itself. It's not just another main street. It's so much more than that. It's an element of our panel's process that we came to the conclusion that Pennsylvania Avenue is the place that should jump to the mind of every American when they mentally associate a need to protest, cheer, mourn, or simply gather with a space itself. And in that respect, it was contingent upon us to fight the need to over-design or dramatically mess with the avenue, but instead to build a stage upon which to facilitate all of the things that make us uniquely American, the ultimate expression of democracy in action. And with that, I'm going to turn back over to Kathleen.
That was really terrific, Heather. And you're right. I mean, Pennsylvania Avenue is unique, but some of its issues are ones that can apply to cities all over the world as they emerge from a very changing retail scene, not just because of the pandemic, but because the way we shop has changed. So that's really interesting. And the idea of a stage, of course, is very interesting and something that's going to be taken up by our next speaker, Helen, who is the director and co-founder of Artichoke, a cultural and arts production company that creates spectacular events with lasting influence throughout the United Kingdom. Helen was awarded a Loeb Fellowship at the Harvard Graduate School of Design in 2012, an acknowledgement of the positive impact that Artichoke has made on communities and the way that mass public art events are negotiated and staged and can just stimulate bringing people together. Helen.
Hello. As you can probably tell from my voice, I'm not part of the great American democracy, and I'm so honored to be the outsider in this extraordinary team of people who've been working for years on these proposals. I'm here to talk to you today just about what the vision might be, not in terms of bricks and mortar, but of the temporary transformation of the site. And I think Sarah is just going to let some slides run. I'm not going to talk to these images, but just to create an atmosphere, which I hope may have some resonance with those of Pennsylvania Avenue. When one visits Pennsylvania Avenue, like the Mall here in London, you see something that is special, monumental, and where the permanent meets the impermanent. The fixed traditions that we all know and love take place within a frame, within a stage. And the idea that frame remains permanent and remains solid in our hearts, while the temporary transformation of that site can be as extraordinary as the slide you're seeing here in front of you, or can be the military parade that you saw beforehand. You're simply talking about a space, a civic space that frames our expectation and offers us a platform upon which to congregate, to come together and to enjoy each other's company, whether that's as part of an entertainment, part of a protest, part of a demonstration. And you see these cities all over the world, as Heather was referring to cities all over America, but everybody has these places which are vital to the civic demonstration of our values, but get used in all kinds of ways to create memory, I suppose I would say, that these framed spaces, whether they are considered to be public stages, temporary galleries, concert halls, they exist in the outdoors, they exist as a place where we can all come together and where our experience of being together is as important as our experience of those things that we actually witness or participate in. what's really important about these spaces, and I'm showing you all kinds of images here, is that you treat the built environment not as a road to somewhere, but as a destination in itself, as a place where we want to be, where there is a permanent invitation to everybody, whether they're from the poorest background or the richest, most privileged background, that the space that they inhabit is shared on an equitable and equal basis. This is currently in London in Somerset House. It's a forest by the great designer S. Devlin as part of the London Design Biennale. And I'm sure the people who built Somerset House, it was home to the Queens of England, never imagined it would transform itself into a forest. But just as with the most important thing that happens in Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the inauguration once every 4 years, that is a permanent fixture in the national calendar, but is a temporary event that comes and goes. And I suppose my contention in working with our notable panelists all through this process has been to try and encourage the idea that this very important place is a holding area for an extraordinary range of incredible things that can happen and that, once witnessed, can live in the memory forever. Because Pennsylvania Avenue can be a stage, a gallery, or a concert venue. The uses of it actually define the space, but what really defines the space is the invitation that's issued. And the question about the invitation is who's invited and how does that communicate itself? So with these monumental spaces, this is Trafalgar Square in the centre of London, you might argue that it's London's public forum. Somehow, through initiatives through the Mayor of London, that very important civic and political stage has become a place where everybody feels invited. When terrible tragedies happen, that's where people gather. This is the Fourth Plinth in London, the site for changing temporary sculpture, temporary in the sense that it lasts for 18 months and then is changed again to something else. But there's a constant commentary between people and the spaces where which they inhabit. And that doesn't mean that it can't at times be the bus route, it can't at times be a road. But what is important and what came through all our conversations is flexibility. What you're looking at here is the installation of poppies that was made. This is the Tower of London. Nothing could be more symbolic of Britain's history, transformed momentarily into a monument to the fallen in the First and Second World Wars. 5 million people came to visit this installation. It was free. It's always important that things are free in order to maintain those no barriers to access, that sense of invitation being offered equally. But it was dramatic. It was transformational. And so I would contend, I guess, just because of the work that I do, is that the imagination of artists, here you see somebody reenacting the final scene from the Italian Job on a famous 1930s art pavilion. The imagination of artists can transport us to a place where those things that seem permanent are suddenly less so. This is a sculpture by Richard Wilson in which an office block became the canvas, if you like, for a rotating public sculpture. Every 40 seconds or so, that moving piece of building would slot itself into the architecture and the building would be temporarily perfect. And then it would be imperfect and more interesting as it moved along. So I suppose what I'm interested in exploring in relation to Pennsylvania Avenue is how the monumental can be made intimate, how the invitation can be extended, how everybody can feel that both they have something to say and something to experience and something to witness, and how this singularly important place within the American democratic system can be host to not only extraordinary events and activities, but to an entire population, irrespective of background, irrespective of visitor, resident, or whoever they might be, that the possibility of transforming their experience, of allowing them to visit a place that they think they know, but temporarily might find utterly different, utterly transformed, and how walking away from that experience might mean that they live with those memories, not only of the physical transformation of the buildings and the roadways, but the transformation of the feeling of those that they shared it with. And I think that's the end. And I'm going to hand back to Kathleen.
Thank you for that wonderfully evocative presentation and that little tour around London and other wonderful cities, which can help inspire all of us. Okay, so the question was, how can Pennsylvania Avenue best be an inclusive space for all? I think a lot of us were inspired by Helen to pick the number 3 option, serve as a stage to uplift, inspire, and entertain. That was 41% of the respondents. Highlighted symbolic role locally, nationally, and internationally. That was 3rd, provide a space for healing, grief, celebration, and protest. That was 2nd. Recognize nations past, present, and future, 10%. And lastly, showcase sustainable design and infrastructure. Or what I wanted to do, which was check all of the above, but I think this has been a good beginning. So now I'm really pleased to introduce Laurie Olin, who is one of the most renowned and distinguished landscape architects practicing today. He's also a teacher and an author. And with his firm, Olin, he has guided many, many signature public projects, including the Washington Monuments Ground in Washington, D.C., the grounds of the new U.S. Embassy in London, and in New York, my hometown. Brian, many, many distinguished projects. Welcome, Laurie.
Hi. Thank you, Kathleen. Well, it's a delight to be here and with this great group of people to think about this important place. Let's take a look at the first slide. You know, for about 230 years now, a lot of intelligent people have been trying to figure out what is the best version of this very important street. That's a letter from Thomas Jefferson, who was puzzled about it in the upper left. And of course, 1974, SOM with others and for Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation tried to come up with what is now out. They didn't try, they produced pretty much what's out there today. And, you know, it's clearly this extremely important place. And everybody knows it very well from what happens every 4 years, as you see in the slide below in the past. Next, go to the next slide. But the reality for decades has been a bit more difficult. It's often a very unfortunate, difficult place. The street is gloomy all winter, you know, lots of perpetual shade. In the summer, it's blistering hot. You know, the pedestrians have been pushed to the sides by vehicular traffic. You know, the autos have the middle where their drivers are all concentrating on the traffic, not on the view. And, you know, the grandeur of this great vista, this Baroque street is lost, it's wasted. Let's go to the next slide. So, you know, one of the simplest solutions is put people back in the middle. You know, let the pedestrians and cyclists have the great view and push the cars a bit more to the side. That's one possible idea out of many. There's other versions that we've studied. This is only one of several. Let's go to the next. But really, one of the things we all come back to and kept talking about was how to frame the space, how to frame the vista. It's how to discipline the vehicles, how to give it back to pedestrians, and how to provide the vision when nothing else is going on, that this is a great place and it's important, and it puts emphasis and dignity back into the significant buildings at the end of it. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So framing it's important. And you know, when you're there, if you get out in the middle, you realize this is a great place to be. It's clearly the place to be, not pushed against the cliff of the federal buildings on the right in the shade. And I mean, the shade's great in the summer, but in the winter it's freezing cold. And the other side, you scorch in the summer, but you want the sun in the winter. It's seems symmetrical, but it's not really in terms of microclimates, which is peculiar. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So one of the things is that we're not proposing any particular design yet. We've studied a bunch of things to see what might work and to say that what we're showing you, everything we talk about is feasible. It's just, they could work somehow. I mean, we believe bicycles and pedestrians, there's enough room in the street. There's so much extra capacity to give space to everybody. There's even room to take care of stormwater, which we desperately need to catch and keep and clean and take care of, as we know, instead of throwing it in the ocean and turning it into salt water as fast as possible. So one of the things that we need to do is make sure that of the stage that we set is technically possible. And so we've discovered that that's true. Let's go to the next slide. But let me say that it's been awful for a long time. It's been obvious for the past 20 years or more that we need to rethink it. We need to rebuild it. We need to undo the mess that we've made of it. I mean, this god-awful, inappropriate, and as we've seen, completely ineffective, misplaced sense of security. They made us not secure from anything. This heavy-handed stuff has got to go. We got to sweep it aside. Next, please. I mean, elsewhere in the country, we have discovered and we've produced, my firm and other firms have produced streets that are greatly enhanced, that are pleasurable pedestrian areas that are shared with buses and bicycles right out in the middle. There are ways to do this. It's been done, and it could be cheerful and it could be much nicer than what's there. Let's go ahead to the next slide. I mean, Pennsylvania Avenue, conceived as a great civic boulevard based upon the dimensions of the Champs-Élysées, has never achieved any of the life or potential of its precedent, the one that it was based upon. There you see actually a cafe at the Champs-Élysées on the sunny side of the street and the right side of the slide, or as in places here in Chicago and Philadelphia and New York, like that restaurant you see on the street in Chicago on the left. There's none of this on that street, but it could be. And as you've heard earlier, especially with temporary facilities. Let's go ahead. Now, that lugubrious urban spaces exist all over the country, not just Pennsylvania. But that slide on the left is a space that existed for over 30 years here in the city of Philadelphia, to our dismay, in front of City Hall. But recently, it's been redesigned to be a flexible urban space like you see on the right. It allows pedestrians to come and go in the usual daily life of the city, but it also has some quiet and pleasant and dignified spaces for people to rest and relax appropriately. But go to the next slide. It is also a very flexible space as it's been redesigned, and it's a place that now you can find children playing, kids from all kinds of neighborhoods right in front of City Hall, having a great time when it's too hot at home. And then you can also see that it's flexible enough to provide for great civic events, and whether they're happy celebrations that finally one of our professional teams won something, or whether it's we're all upset about something else like has happened in this last several years, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the whole problems that we've had with our recent election and that sort of thing, that spaces can handle this thing if it's well designed. Let's go to the last. I think there's one more maybe. Yeah, so I think the thing is, it's, as you've heard earlier, it's a social issue. It's a programming issue. It should be open. It is a public street. It must be a public street, but it also needs to be redesigned. It needs to be reframed and rethought physically as well as socially. Thank you. That's it. Thanks. Back to Kathleen.
Thank you so much for beginning to sort of tempt us. You said you hadn't designed it. Okay, that's true, but it's the beginning of ideas that are quite specific, and that was wonderful to see, Laurie. And now it is my pleasure to hand things over to Hani Hassan, who's been a passionate steward of our cultural heritage through his work revitalizing historic buildings and sites of civic importance, for the firm Beyer, Belle in their Washington, D.C. office, really one of the most foremost firms doing the kind of work. And here in Washington, under Hannie's leadership, he's worked extensively on significant public architecture projects that are positively reshaping the nation's capital. So he's in a very good position. Plus, you've spent a lot of time on that avenue, haven't you, Hani? So thank you so much. Please welcome Hani Hassan.
Right. Thank you, Kathleen. If we can just start with the first slide. Pennsylvania Avenue between the White House and the Capitol does not exist in isolation, as you see in this diagram. It is very much an integral part of the city, and it's practically in the heart of Washington, D.C. I believe that the success of repositioning the avenue and this initiative also relies on its connectivity to its immediate context and to the city in general. So I just wanted to take a minute to address that aspect of the plan. On this diagram, you see that Pennsylvania Avenue is positioned between four major icons of our city. The diagonal axis between the White House and the Capitol, and the east-west axis along the National Mall between the Capitol and the Washington Monument, and to the north between the White House and Union Station. So this establishes the boundaries, north, south, and east, west of the context, which is illustrated in the next diagram. As you heard in previous, there's a little bit of delay here if we can go to the next one. As you heard in the previous discussions, that even though it is a linear axis, it appears to be symmetrical, but truly it isn't. It's relatively unbalanced. To the south, it's what I call it, the cultural zone. And to the north is the commercial and retail zone. On the next slide, it addresses that a little bit more specifically with respect to connectivity from the avenue towards the south, towards the National Mall as a magnet, with the existing array of museums. And to the north, on the next slide, along F Street, there's a necklace of art museums and civic buildings and cultural buildings that draw people to the north, as you see illustrated here. There is another also characteristic of the avenue, which is in the geometry of the avenue being a diagonal street. It is interrupted by the black, those black indicated buildings, including the Wilson Building, the old post office, and the archives. That really disrupts that geometry of the angular axis of the street. But it also introduces a very interesting space, what I refer to as outdoor rooms. Those creates nodes along the avenues and a lot of opportunities for some of the public events that we have spoken about before. Particularly Market Square, which is right in the center of the avenue, in front of the archive and the Navy Memorial. That is also the shortest distance to the south to the National Mall. On the next diagram, it illustrates these outdoor rooms a little bit more specifically. and just a couple of other sketches in front of the old post office, which is the next sketch, please. You could see how the old post office, being an orthogonal orientation, presents an opportunity for that place while you're maintaining the axial nature towards the Capitol. And it's even more pronounced on the next sketch in front of the archives, where it creates this large outdoor room for possibilities of public events, not only during the day, but at night as well. Next, please. I spoke about the Federal Triangle before to the south, but interestingly enough, when the Federal Triangle was originally conceived, which is the diagram on the top, meant to be open and permeable in the east-west direction, and it wasn't meant to create that barrier that exists today, which is the diagram at the bottom. So I feel that this is an impediment in terms of connecting Pennsylvania Avenue to the National Mall and to all the museums in that area. So one of our thoughts is that can we introduce that type of permeability in the east-west direction through some of those existing buildings? Granted, there are issues of security here that we have to deal with, but also Helen shared with us earlier how in other cities they were all able to open some of these federal buildings for events that do happen, not necessarily every day, but periodically. Not only to make use of the spaces within these courtyards that you see on that diagram, but also to be able to really enjoy these spaces and be able to appreciate it, as opposed to being always behind that fortress of a space that nobody can ever penetrate. So the issue of security is a big issue here that we need to sort of address and hopefully to overcome, because what this meant to do is to really open this avenue and its context to sort of welcome everybody to this area. And on the next slide shows those two particular terminus or ends of the avenue between President's Park and Square 575 in front of the U.S. Capitol, and the current events that happen in the past year or so, which is illustrated in the next slide. The image on the left, which is sort of seared in our minds with the U.S. Capitol behind the 12 wires, is that really the place we want to live in and keep it open to people to welcome Washingtonians and everybody from the rest of the nation. And to the right, which is arguably maybe the artwork that did happen, maybe almost like in an incredibly timely fashion for the current events of what transpired but in front of the White House. So the issue of security is a big issue that we need to address, and we need to really analyze and see how that could be dealt in a way that is very responsive, but at the same time maintain the openness of the avenue and the city to welcome everyone, Washingtonians and all visitors around the country. And back to Kathleen.
Thank you for that, for giving us such a clear view, Hanny, of the potential and also the obstacles and how things have changed, which is something we'll be talking about later in our discussion. Now I am happy to introduce Anita Morrison, who is the who founded Partners for Economic Solutions after more than 30 years of economic and development consulting. During her career, Anita has specialized in public-private partnerships, real estate advisory services, redevelopment strategies, and economic impact analysis, including work for the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation. So she is in a unique position to tell us both about realities and potentialities. Please join me in welcoming Anita.
Thank you, Kathleen. So as we move ahead, then the final element of this effort is to prepare an action strategy to make sure that this exciting vision actually is implemented. In the short term, we need to focus on helping people envision the Avenue's future, bring them back to Pennsylvania Avenue, and raise the Avenue's profile locally and nationally. In the longer term, we need to focus on updating the Pennsylvania Avenue plan, creating a new effective structure, and securing the funding for implementation. Next slide. Over the short term, as I mentioned, the most important thing will be to use the programming that Helen talked about so eloquently to build momentum and support for the vision and for the future improvements. So that would mean focusing primarily on the major events, particularly for 2022 and beyond. And we would expect that Events DC and the Downtown DC bid would lead that effort. Simultaneously, we need to be furthering the plan to update the 1974 Pennsylvania Avenue Plan. That means developing concept alternatives and completing the NEPA Section 106 regulatory steps that are required for any major federal action. Next slide. Both DC and the federal government have key interests in Pennsylvania Avenue for the role that it plays in the monumental core and in the nation's commemorations, as well as the functions that it plays for the local population, attracting visitors, generating support for local businesses, and providing daily outdoor experiences for workers and for residents, and meeting residents' transit needs. So the joint vision that will be refined through this process will encompass both physical improvements and a plan for effective operations. And that joint vision calls out for a joint decision-making process where each entity plays a role in the funding and the implementing of the plan. Next slide. So the current structure and the division of responsibilities and jurisdictions really won't work to implement this re-energized, active Pennsylvania Avenue. We strongly recommend that a new entity be created, if you will, a Pennsylvania Avenue Corporation. The Avenue needs staff that wake up every morning with a focus on improving and maintaining the Avenue. So that means focusing on the day-to-day operations and all the improvements. One key element would be to transfer the sidewalks from National Park Service responsibility to the District of Columbia. One of the reasons you don't have all of the efforts, all the benefits of cafes and frequent installations along the Avenue's sidewalks is that the Park Service has to apply its rules that were developed for Yellowstone and Yosemite to this very urban location. And so it constrains the potential for vendors and for the kind of activities that residents would appreciate and the local businesses. So we need to just pull everyone together, all the agencies that have interests along the avenue and in its environments, and use this new structure to ensure that there's empowerment as well as accountability. Next slide. So on the funding side, there will obviously be a major need for multiple funding sources. For the improvements, the physical improvements, we'd expect that it would be a combination of congressional appropriations, DC government capital funding, possibly tax increment financing, and a supplemental tax on business improvement district properties that benefit from all these improvements. For the operations side, we really need a number of different sources of revenue to cover the costs of what can be very expensive events. And that means drawing on sponsorships, promotional contributions, event permit and user fees, and partner pooled funds. Foundations and grants have been a major source of that kind of funding. And even in the near term, the CARES Act has monies available to help support rebuilding the district's tourism economy. So that could be good support for the near term events. And then finally, it's really, the key is to set a clear course with major milestones that will keep everyone moving forward. Let's take advantage of 2026, the nation's 250th birthday, to achieve some of the first major steps in this effort. So with that, Kathleen.
For giving us some of the real nuts and bolts about really what has to happen here. And I'm always interested in whether or not public agencies, governmental agencies like to give anything up. Maybe we'll get into that in the Q&A. But before we do, I'd like to you all to participate, all of the audience, in the final poll, which is on your screen now. What changes would draw you to Pennsylvania Avenue? If you just, will take a few seconds for you to fill that out. Okay, so the results are in. The point that won the most was people were saying they would most prefer, 37% most prefer year-round programming, including daily arts and entertainment and large-scale events. Second was increased activity to enliven the sidewalks. Third was better connections to the National Mall and surrounding neighborhoods, which Hanny talked about. That was 15%. And safe and pedestrian-friendly spaces, 13%. I think that might apply to almost everything, however. And interestingly, not really much interest in public observation decks for unique views. I think people want to be down on the street. So now if the panel would kindly put on their cameras and unmute, we will begin to have a discussion. And there's so much to talk about in not a great deal of time, but we want to leave a little time at the end for questions from the audience. So one of the things, obviously Pennsylvania Avenue is, we can't get into it too deeply, but it's so important and symbolically and historically. But the question is, how do you take a street like that? Can you hear me? How do you take a street like that and bring it also into the modern world? I mean, there's been a lot of things that have happened that were not perhaps organized, like all of those weird left-hand turn things and the things that make the street kind of really difficult. But you're taking a street, I'd like a little historical background, that was originally designed for carriages and horses, as well as for some walkers. I don't know if the pedestrians were separated. And was the street the width it is now from the beginning? Can we get a little historic background? And then if one of you might address what makes a street modern? Because clearly the traffic engineers thought they were modernizing it, and that hasn't helped us.
I can speak to that very quickly. If you saw that sketch of Jefferson's, one of the things is it was exactly based on the dimension it is now, and it was based upon the Champs-Élysées as laid out by Andre Lenotre. And it did have two side, it's sort of like the Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia and the Champs-Élysées. There was a large carriageway in the middle, then two rows of trees, and then there were local access lanes on each side of the street, and then there were pedestrian walks. So there were basically three different cartways, one on each side for local access, and then through traffic in the middle. And it was always meant to be something else. And now we don't actually want all that because the uses on the sides aren't the same as they were in the original composition.
Yeah, but
Jeffrey, do you want to comment on that? I mean, there's tons of capacity there.
There is tons of capacity, and I think the current form of the street represents a mid-20th century set of values,
Right.
particularly a performance metric called level of service. Level of service is level of service.
Okay.
Level of service measures the seconds of delay that a car experiences as a result of congestion. And for 50 years, it was our primary transportation performance metric. Our primary value as transportation professionals was to reduce congestion-related delays to cars, which meant that a person on board a 40-passenger WMATA bus was valued at 1/40th the worth of somebody driving alone in a car, and a person on a bike or on foot only mattered insofar as they delayed the important people driving alone in cars. So the street is a manifestation of our values. We need to change the way we measure transportation success to be in alignment with today's values. And that can result in a much, I would argue, more modern street design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of equity right now, it's very inequitable in that people in single occupant vehicles have priority over everybody in the world. And it's just not right. And the other thing to say is that almost all the designs that I've done that people really like were usually designed by subtraction. So I think we need to get rid of things here and edit heavily.
The original.
One other aspect of the modern aspect of the street, what makes Pennsylvania Avenue unique is the aspect of flexibility. It's unlike any other street that you have to deal with the common requirements. Mm-hmm. This particular stretch between White House and the Capitol requires that aspect of flexibility, which, I mean, as much as it is a challenge, it makes it very unique, very vibrant, and it offers a lot more than any other place. I would like to address it that way, as opposed to the modern nature.
As an opportunity, not as obstacles. And of course, those wide sidewalks were not originally there, were they? I mean, they are now arguably the sort of pedestrian side lanes that maybe Jefferson originally envisioned, or that they have along the Champs-Élysées where they have cafes. So that actually that real estate really exists already, doesn't it? If you can just make it not like crossing a 6-lane highway and taking your life in your hands to get from the north side to the south side. So the idea that you sort of showed in a sketch or a design that you said was not a design, but come on, it was the beginning of a design, which was to have a central part. I mean, I think a little bit of like Park Avenue, New York City, which would basically enhance the vista because there wouldn't be cars in the middle of your vista going up to the Capitol. How realistic is that? I mean, it seems like it slows traffic. There's still room for cars, but would that seem to be something? Did all of you come together around an idea like that?
Not particularly. Let's put it this way. It's one of many ideas, but in order to have the empty stage that Helen needs, we can't fill up the middle with a bunch of stuff. It can't be like, the mall in Boston. What is that? Commonwealth Avenue. It can't be that. And so we can't put trees out there. I mean, really, I mean, they'd have to be in planters, and they're not really great trees. They don't provide shade. So there's some questions about it. And I saw the poll. It was interesting. People said, no, I don't want to be out there. I'd rather be on the side. I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
I think what was interesting about both polls was the significance of activity over structure. So both polls, the idea of something that invited you down there, as opposed to, you know, faster transportation or great views. I think maybe, you know, 40 or 50 years ago, you might have got really different answers to that, to those questions. But to Jeffrey's point about flexibility and the way in which our physical environment needs to change with our changing values, I think what you're seeing in those responses is the idea that people value that space as a sort of civic and historic space, but they want it to be offering something that is different from the everyday, that matches the grandeur of the space itself and its importance. And I think what Jeffrey's also saying about, you know, how historically we privilege the car and the independence and all of that stuff over the pedestrian. I think, you know, in 40 years' time, everyone will be astonished when we have had a green revolution and the planet is becoming restored. The idea that the sort of combustion engine was the thing that we felt was the most important thing, I think all of that will change. And so I guess there's an argument for building in flexibility and the temporary into a place which, as Hani said in his speech, I was really struck by what he said about, you know, the historic is important. It is important that people feel that this is a place that, you know, if you're coming from Kansas and you've never been to Washington before, you want to visit. But you also want there to be things that humanize the inhuman about it, I think.
And bring it to scale too.
One of the things that came up in our discussions among ourselves was that climate change is going to have a huge effect upon transportation. And Jeffrey has proved, I think, to all of us that this street has a role in public transportation far greater than it has for private automobiles in the long run. You know, that it's just inevitable. And so if as long as we make sure it still works for that, while it works for these other programmatic ideas, I think we'll be okay.
Well, also the public transportation thing is essential to a point that has been coming up during this entire conversation, which is to really deal with equity and inclusion in Washington, D.C., which in addition to being our nation's capital is, as I said, one of the most diverse cities in the U.S. with an African-American population of nearly 50%, with not a lot of residents in that neighborhood. And so how do you really make this welcoming? And one is you don't need a car and you don't need to park in an expensive garage. You've got to have another way to get there, A, and B, when you're there, you really need to feel like you belong there and it's for you too. So you've all touched on this. It's a really important topic. And I was glad that Hannie showed the Black Lives Matter painted on the street, which I visited last summer and, you know, was very moving, and all of the posters and signs along the fence around the White House. It was really extraordinary. Can you, in your own way, perhaps address the very important issue of inclusion in general for our country, but very specifically for the city of Washington, D.C.? Helen, I think obviously you have talked about the success of events where all different kinds of people come together in the UK. I have
to say that that isn't anything that results from a casual or accidental approach. You have to be very specific and very targeted and make sure that you're speaking the right language to the right communities. People are very easy to ignore. You can assume that your broad invitation is an invitation to everyone, just as we all assume that, you know, roadways are accessible to everyone. But you have to really think through what is appealing to people, what makes them feel safe, what makes them feel welcome, what makes them feel unwelcome. You know, that if a particular street has been in their minds only a street of protest and a street where, you know, their community is not safe, you have to work really hard to make sure that whatever it is you're programming and the way that you communicate about that is really specifically targeted so that you can combat those feelings of exclusion or fear.
Yeah, Kathleen, I'll address that just for practical purposes. Just the fact that this particular part of Pennsylvania Avenue is so central to the city and accessible from many directions. It's not to like the east side of the city or the north side of the city, that it's away from the heart of the city. And so that aspect of it make it accessible to everyone.
Mhm.
I feel that this is that's part of the inclusivity or but also the openness of the north-south streets, say, or in all directions. That is perhaps one of the areas that does need improvements in order to make it more inviting, particularly on the Federal Triangle side. Because, say, on one end of the triangle, it's more accessible and it's more open and more inviting. But when you get to the large part of the Federal Triangle, it's really an impediment. And that's some of the areas that needs to be worked on to make it more inclusive. So that's a practical aspect of it.
And it's a serious one. I mean, for those of us who visit Washington and don't live there, we've seen over the 20 years since 9/11, we've seen so many more street closures and closures for security reasons all over, and it affects the whole city. There's also a question about when we think of protests or public gatherings, including inaugurations, we think also a lot about the mall. And also, I think a lot of those things take place. A lot of people marched on Constitution Avenue, the demonstrators on January 6th. Is it important for Pennsylvania Avenue to remain a kind of public stage for that kind of protest, which I think Heather, you were sort of describing can actually hurt business on Pennsylvania Avenue? Is there any reason to think that should be discouraged and pushed more to Constitution Avenue in the mall? Or is it just a bad idea in general to prescribe or proscribe activities?
It's a great question. I think that if we think about the street from a more philosophical standpoint, it really is the connection point between our judiciary branch, our legislative branch, and our executive branch. And from that perspective, I think it should always have, that type of operation for even the most odious activity. I think that it's really important that it be for everyone, almost in the sense of like ultimate diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate expression of democracy to say it's for everyone.
The First Amendment.
I think exactly. And for that reason, I almost think that that's the best argument for not having people that are dependent on regular business activity there to be located there.
Kathleen,
because of the inherent conflicts that the two create.
I want to support Heather's remark, and I want to point out that we redesigned Independence Mall here in Philadelphia. And one of the things we did was, at one point, we did a little plaza for First Amendment demonstrations so that you could set up cameras and there'd be Independence Hall and there'd be the Belle and everything in the background. And it turns out people didn't want to go there. They protested wherever they wanted to, and they were allowed to, because it turns out telling them they can't go somewhere and they should go take your protest somewhere else. No, that's not how we do it. We do it where we want to do it. If I'm really mad, I'll go where I feel mad. So I think we have to allow the street to be that. But one of the other things about this whole business about inclusion and equity, I found that one of the keys is to, if in most of the work we've done, we've tried to make sure that children would feel good there, and elderly people would feel they could go there too, because they're if it works for them, it works for everybody. It's really, it's a kind of litmus test for civilization. Does it work for kids? Does it work for old people? Then everybody in between will find they can use it too. That's like the way the buses work.
It's interesting. Helen, you're muted, Helen?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that one of the saddest things in our 5-day charrette that I saw on the Avenue, I don't know if the other panelists will agree with me, was the tiny children coming out of the primary school that's located near the FBI building. And a little space on the sidewalk was demarcated by cones and tape to allow them to play.
It was pathetic. It was sad.
Huge monumental avenue. And I just thought about being a 3 or 4-year-old coming out of my school and being restricted to this 10-foot by 20-foot space while the traffic whipped past me. And I was thinking, if we do one thing, we have to make it better for those kids to feel that this is a place where they can play.
Also,
if you threw a ball in that space and it went outside your 10-foot area, what are you going to do? You're going to be shot, you're going to be run over, you're going to be somehow. That for me symbolized everything that was wrong with it, which was that somebody was trying to run something of normal life on Pennsylvania Avenue with that tiny school. And it was so inappropriate given the context in which those children were being brought up.
And that message that's sent to everybody from all these temporary concrete barriers and bollards that look temporary, but they aren't temporary. I mean, they're there forever. They just seem to be there for years. You all who live in Washington can say that. Or even more horribly, orange cones. I mean, those should be there for days, and they're not. So, that sends a really terrible message. I'm interested in Anita's proposals because Anita did bring us to reality in some very important ways, and as did Heather and all of you, and obviously with all your experience. But people love to complain about government, and how government can't get anything done, and how you can't even get your driver's license renewed, blah, blah, blah. So here you have a part of Washington that is part federal government. The National Park Service rules the sidewalks. I think the district rules the street itself. And then you've got all those federal buildings, and Hannie was touching on that, and all of the security. And it makes your head explode. I mean, you just think, how the heck will you get anything done? Anita, how will you get anything done?
It gets even worse when you start talking about trying to permit an event on Pennsylvania Avenue because of all those disparate interests, and they all have different rules and different processes. It's very expensive, and it's very difficult to put that together. So I think that's why we want to see the powers embedded in one corporation, one entity, and the accountability for making sure that those systems work more effectively. And that
I have one more question, and then I'd like to we have some good questions from the audience. But that is, you did the charrette in the end of 2018. Hannie, some of you briefly addressed this, but how have the Black Lives Matter movement, which was really reinstigated in the summer of 2020, and of course, COVID, which we think we're emerging from, but maybe not. How is that affecting, how has that affected your thinking about a project to which all of you devoted a lot of your wisdom and expertise before any of this happened?
It's accelerated the urgency of the need to get something done. So, the Black Lives Matter protest was ultimately about treating all Americans equally and restoring the promise of our democracy, of which the street is a symbol. We have to correct the symbol as we correct the foundations of our democracy.
Just very briefly, when we had our charrette, the issue of security was brought up, and we had to, of course, address it and deal with it just because of the nature of the events that does happen, the events that do happen along the avenue. But it really became, at least in my mind, as we all contemplate about what happened and what is perhaps to happen in the future, is really to address this issue of security perhaps in a different way. Not to think about it as more barriers, more chain link fence, more barbed wire. That we ought to be looking at it. Is it security or insecurity? How do we deal with that intelligently so the entire city doesn't become a fortress that is kind of forbidding everybody from coming close to it, but for the reason of being safe and secure? I truly do not believe that this provides the necessary security, because it could be overcome, as you could see it anywhere and everywhere. So, at least in my mind, it became in the forefront as opposed to the security aspects that we deal with on a daily basis. That was a little bit different between the time when we conducted the charrette and today. It just became very obvious that is not the right way of putting more barriers in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Laurie came up with a wonderful statement last week when we were discussing this, which I wrote down because I thought it was so funny, where he talked about the barriers and the fencing, and he said, it just looks terrible all of the time rather than proving itself useless some of the time.
It's great.
I'm glad I said it. It's true. And it's getting worse. And just watch what they do at the Capitol next, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a great landscape by the Olmsted firm there that worked perfectly and would have been just as defensible or indefensible as what's there now. You know, what's there now is not defensible either. We've proved that, you know, it's some other people, not me, but.
Yeah.
And more is not going to help us. You know, we don't need foreign crazies. We've got our own, you know.
Let me ask you another politically charged question that one of our audience, which is really interesting, and you Washingtonians can address it. How would pending DC statehood, it's interesting that this member of the audience thinks that it's pending, but anyway, how would pending DC statehood be addressed in some of these ideas? Most of the length of Pennsylvania Avenue beyond the Capitol and west of the White House would become a DC street, though, as we said, actually the street itself is currently a DC street. But would DC statehood affect what we're discussing here, Anita or Jeffrey? No.
There certainly could be issues related to funding and jurisdiction, but I think the concept of it continuing to be a joint effort between the district government and the federal government is still just critical. Even the statehood proposition comes with some concept of a monumental core that would still have a federal interest involved. And so I think this just reinforces the importance of joint decision-making and joint administration.
This question I'm going to ask was, I think, somewhat addressed by Hani, but we can take it up briefly again. How do the panelists view the relationship, and thank you for that, Anita. How do the panelists view the relationship of Pennsylvania Avenue to the National Mall, and how can the avenue help activate the neighborhoods beyond? So to unify the city rather than compartmentalize one area segment. And I think you did address that, Hani, in your brief presentation. Does anybody want to add to that?
I would just add briefly, I don't think that we can think about them in an isolated way, but they're all part of this infrastructure that has to exist in DC, regardless of statehood or jurisdiction or any of those other things, which is that we function on two levels like most cities do, where New York has to function as a neighborhood for the people who live there. It's also, the city that never sleeps and belongs to the world. I think DC has a similar type of duality. And Pennsylvania Avenue will be a street in the District of Columbia that also functions as a world stage. And I think that they have to coexist. It's a parallel track rather than an either or.
Thank you for that. Freedom Plaza comes this question, is a huge barren frying pan of a public space. I like that metaphor, especially during Washington summers. Any thoughts to restoring the diagonal path of Pennsylvania Avenue, reestablishing the former triangular parks? I don't quite get restoring trees and green space in front of the Wilson building, making it greener and more human in scale. It could accommodate large events and crowds.
I'll speak to that quickly, but I think others should too. We came up with 3 different versions at one point, which I think will become public. And one of them was to put the diagonal right back and then reinstate trees as the frame, etc. And that was one of the possibilities that we took very seriously. The other one we took very seriously was to allow the traffic to continue to go around it as it does on the side toward the hotel, and have it be basically a park that's attached, a park and plaza attached to the south side, and actually add trees and that sort of thing. Leave the vista through, but we thought it could be a greener plaza than it is now. Absolutely. In either case, whether it's a diagonal or whether it's flagged to the south side. And I think there were several fairly compelling sketches for that. And it didn't affect the buses that go around it now, so they would go around it again, and you'd have local access to the commercial businesses.
Very quickly, since I have the attention of the landscape architect, very quickly, what can be done about the current tree types? They are all uniform, un-American. How about introducing some other tree types like the sycamore, which is very individualistic, which seems more American?
Yeah, well, we could do that. I would not do it as a higgledy-piggledy, lots of variety along the street. I would do them in big clumps so that the ends are like bookmarks and the middle is something. I think there could be other species that would not be a bad idea, but I think we also have to maintain the kind of classic framing as well. So we can't let that fall apart. So yes, we could have more variety, but it has to be done within a rhythm like music.
Would anybody like to add some last minute comments on anything we have not touched? I hate the accuracy of the computer clock. You know exactly what time it is. But if anybody'd like to make a comment, this would be a good moment to do so.
Kathleen, I'll make a comment. I think this is just an amazing opportunity, not just because of the rich program and what could be done here, but this could be an exemplary street that could be like a destination for people to come to see that part of Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, that's one thought that always come to mind, just because it's very defined. And it has all these aspects of intrigue and challenge and flexibility and possibilities, and all the history of it, of course, makes it very ripe to be that exemplary street.
And wouldn't it be great if some architect or urbanist in Europe was showing that street as a slide instead of Las Ramblas or the mall in London, but that was a street that was an example of how to do it right in a great American city.
It's not now.
Yeah.
So our ultimate goal is to get in Helen's slideshow. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I just say, speaking as the sort of outsider here, that when I was asked to take part in this process, I thought it was a sort of blue sky thinking kind of dream thing. And the thing for me that has been so extraordinary is the journey in my own mind in thinking what a radical, bold, innovative, extraordinary initiative this is by NCPC and these panelists. And the idea that you might take this street, which everyone recognizes isn't really working, and turn it into something exemplary. I would say only in America. Only in America do you have the balls really to do this stuff. So I'm really honored to be part of it. And, you know, I was saying to somebody the other day, if I ever have grandchildren, I want to stand with them in the middle of this street, Laurie, looking at these views going, we did this.
Okay, well, Helen, you know that Lewis Mumford once said, trend is not destiny. You know, that's why we, you know, I would say that's why we have steering wheels on our car. We can go here, not there. You know, so change is possible and it's going to happen.
I think it would be hard to top Helen's remarks as the way to end this fantastic panel. Thank you, Helen. But I do want to just, first of all, I'm extremely honored to have been brought in to moderate this event, which I barely had to do anything. You all have done the real work, but I'm just want to thank you all, you 6 people. What an extraordinary group and breadth of specialties and insights and wisdom that you brought to this process. And I love Helen's optimism that this is the beginning and it can happen. And I also want to thank the audience for joining today, because I think if one thing has come through, it's how much the National Capital Planning Commission wants the participation of all of the stakeholders who we have continued to identify in this process. So great to be part of it. Thank you all for bringing the extraordinary potential of Pennsylvania Avenue back to all of us for hopefully a far more vibrant and inclusive future. Hope everybody has a good afternoon and a good evening to you and Helen in the UK, and a good morning to you, Jeffrey, in San Francisco. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
It's great.